Tired of shoes that don't quite fit right? New Mexico Shoes has a solution. Introducing our custom insoles and arch supports made just for you and ready the same day right here in Albuquerque. Perfectly tailored to your feet, enjoy the comfort and support you need. And while you're here, explore a huge selection of top brands. From casual to athletic, we've got the perfect pair waiting for you. Visit NewMexicoShoes.com for hours and location details. All right, welcome back to another episode of Writer's Block. I am, of course, your host, as always, Journal Staff Writer Sean Reider. Today we have a great interview with Patrick Mayhorn of THEAGGSHIP. That is an independent outlet covering Utah State athletics. Talking about New Mexico's upcoming matchup with Utah State this Saturday. Kind of a big game for Utah State and could be a really interesting momentum builder for New Mexico in particular. But before we get into that, as always, I do want to plug the live shows my colleague Jeff Grammer and I have been doing twice a week, either at 2 p.m. on Mondays after Bronco Mendenhall's weekly press conference, where we talk about what Broncos said, kind of what's going on heading into the week for whatever football game is going on, other developments. We will be talking more and more basketball as that creeps along. And then the post-game live show that we do 30 to 45 minutes after every single game, whether it's home or away. You can find these shows on YouTube and X. Shouldn't be hard to find. We do post them as well on our journal social media accounts too. So we encourage you guys to keep tuning in there. We enjoy doing them. We enjoy talking with fans and kind of hashing different things out. And we encourage you to keep tuning in and keep doing that. But with that, I do want to get to this interview with Patrick. Does great work covering Utah State athletics, and it was a pleasure having him on. Enjoy. All right, I am pleased to be joined by Patrick Mayhorn of THEAGGSHIP. That is an outlet covering Utah State athletics. Patrick, man, thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Happy to talk some football.
All right, interesting game this weekend. New Mexico is 2-4, 1-1 in conference, heading to Logan, Utah to take on Utah State, who was 1-5 and 0-2 in conference. Patrick, I am unfortunately going to overplay the joke here. What is going on in Utah, man?
So there's a lot of ways to answer that question. It has been kind of what we have been trying to figure out for about 2 months now. I think that the biggest problem that they have at this current stage is that the defense has approximately 6 guys who have one problem and then 5 guys who have the exact opposite problem. And they're having a very difficult time figuring out both of those problems without making the other half of the defense worse. About half of the defense that they have right now is too aggressive for their own good. Guys are taking themselves out of position. They're freelancing on plays. It got to the point this past week against UNLV where head coach Nate Dreiling had to at halftime in the locker room just say that if they weren't going to run the defense as it was called, he was going to put in guys who would. And that's kind of where they've been at for these last couple weeks and really, honestly, for the entire season. And then the other half of the defense is too timid because they don't trust the other guys on the defense to be in the right place at the right time. And so the end result that you get is one of the worst defenses in America. And that's been one of the biggest issues that they're bumping up against. And the other one is just that they're turning the ball over too much on offense. But the defense is the biggest root issue of the 1-5 start to the season. They just can't stop anybody right now.
And they're coming off a loss to UNLV, where, frankly, from what I saw, it was just kind of a disaster across the board. The first half, offensively, defensively, and UNLV is obviously, an excellent team, and definitely will be competing for a Mountain West title. And then the second half, where you kind of mentioned that halftime speech, where they came in and they said, "Well, we just have to do it at this point, guys." And ended up playing, pretty well in the second half against UNLV. What is kind of the vibe this week around the program after that loss?
I would say cautious optimism is probably the best way to put it, because the second half really was significantly better, and it was not better in an artificial way. UNLV didn't take its starters off the field. It did slow down the pace offensively, but it was still Haj Malik Williams. It was still the usual guys who were killing them in the first half. The biggest difference is that the usual starters, the usual contributors on defense did seemingly take the message, and the ones who maybe didn't take the message came off the field and they put in younger guys. And the younger guys, I thought, pretty much across the board played really well. They've got guys who are stepping into roles for basically the first time in their college career, especially on the defensive line. They're down approximately 6 of their initial top, 2 deep on the defensive line, several of them to season-ending injuries. And they've got guys playing snaps who really weren't supposed to play snaps this year, who looked like the best players on the field in the second half against UNLV. And so there's a lot of, I guess, hope about that with the defense, and hope around the program that's going to be a solution moving forward. They're not going to be perfect, but they can at least run plays as they've been designed and as they've been told to do. And the offense looked really good in the second half. Spencer Petras threw for almost 500 yards and set a school record for completions. And so I think it's guarded optimism, because we have kind of seen this from this team for not even just this year, but for several years, where it looks like they're about to turn a corner and then they don't. But there's hope with what they saw in the second half that could be sustainable moving forward.
I think points allowed defensively, Utah State is about 42.8 points per game. New Mexico is 42.7, so not far off in terms of the points allowed averages there. And one of the things I think you've kind of heard with New Mexico in particular, and not quite games against Arizona or Auburn and all that, but other games in particular, it's like, man, if they just had a regular defense, an average defense, with this offense in particular, I mean, they could really get something going down the stretch. And I think fans do think that something could still get going down the stretch because of the offense. Is that a similar feeling for Utah State fans at this point?
Yes, and that has been a similar feeling for a couple years now. The defense has been a problem. It's had different coordinators come in and try to fix it. This is Nate Dryling's first year. He was supposed to be the defensive coordinator for this team until he had to be promoted to interim head coach a month before the season. But that's been sort of the frustration point for Utah State fans these last couple of years, because the offense has been consistently pretty good. I think that it has not quite lived up to its potential these last couple of years, and I don't think that it's fully there yet either. But when it's on, it's really, really strong. They have a great running back in Russell Faison. They can throw the ball all over the field. Spencer Petras has been shaky, but when he's on, he's really good. Jalen Royals is one of the best receivers in the conference. The offensive line has taken a massive step forward this year, which has made a really big difference. And it really does come down to just they're turning the ball over too much. They have some dumb penalties sometimes, and then the defense can't get out of its own way. So they're finding themselves in these massive early holes that the offense, even when it starts to get going, which it usually does, it's just too much to try and overcome.
And obviously, to kind of go back to Drylin and all that too, I mean, definitely a tumultuous offseason, to say the least. Former head coach Blake Anderson, a former UNM assistant, he was dismissed in July due to alleged noncompliance with university policy and reporting sexual misconduct. Drylin was hired in January. He was elevated to the interim head coach, I think, immediately after, or I mean, pretty much in the wake. We're familiar with him from his time in New Mexico State, and he did some great work with that defense there. How have you kind of seen Drylin, I don't know if grow is the right word, in kind of the 1 year interim, but I mean, just kind of take on that role as the head coach?
Yeah, I think that he really, honestly, I to go back to that halftime speech that he gave this past Friday, I think that was a sign of growth for him, because usually coordinators don't really have to be the bad guy. Usually coordinators get to play good cop. He's a younger guy. He's 33. I think he's the youngest head coach at the FBS level right now. And I don't think he wanted to do that. I don't think that that's something he was totally comfortable with coming into the season, because he didn't think he would have to be until July. And it was probably necessary earlier for him to put his foot down and be the bad guy in the room, but it's a hard thing to do. That's a hard transition to make. And I think that's been honestly the largest point of growth from him, is that he just got sick of it. He ran out of patience and he had to be the bad guy. And I think that the team could benefit from that, because at some point the substitute teacher feel of having an interim head coach for the entire season has to kind of wear off, and the team has to come to realize, like, okay, this is the guy that we've got for this season. We're going to have to listen to him, and I think that's a step that he has started to take, which is progress. I don't know how much it's going to potentially save this season for Utah State, but I do think that he's growing as a head coach, and I think he's done pretty well with the hand he's been dealt. It was not a very good hand.
No, not a good hand. And honestly, at Mountain West Media Days, I think he was probably the most impressive guy I remember talking to in terms of just, he was very clear in the timeline of when he stepped into the role and just seemed very well equipped for it. And obviously, I mean, we had seen him work with New Mexico State's defense. So we know the on-field part as well. But go ahead and into this season, Utah State was a team I thought I was kind of higher on than others, at least in kind of the Mountain West media circle and all that. After all this has happened and all that, and I mean, heading into the season, what were kind of the general expectations among fans where you have this kind of really unusual and really unfortunate situation playing out?
I think that there was not fully confidence because there were so many new pieces on this team. The defense is kind of two different groups just smashed together with transfers. You had guys who transferred in last year who are still here. You have new guys coming in. And so it wasn't really, it was really hard to get a feel for the team coming into the year. And I think that was the general sense of Utah State fans was, well, they're talented. They could be good or they could be really bad. And they have kind of been both at times this season. It's not helped that they've played, three top 25 teams, three currently top 25 teams, and a fourth borderline top 25 team in UNLV. A team that I think probably should be in the top 25, but they haven't really put it together, and they've looked a lot like a team that's been thrown together and that I don't think really was going to be all that consistent no matter who the head coach was, even if Blake was still around. I think they were still going to have these issues because there's just not really a guiding identity behind this roster. It's more a bunch of guys who they could find. It's just whatever talent we could accumulate and to see what we could do with this. And what they've been able to do with it is sometimes good and sometimes really, really bad.
And that was one of the points that Bronco Mendenhall kind of mentioned during his weekly presser, that some teams you look at and you look at the record and you say, okay, well, that's indicative that they are a 1-5 team. And then other teams you look at the schedule and you go, okay, well, they played UNLV, Boise, Utah, USC. And then there's this mind-boggling loss to Temple and Philadelphia, just kind of wedged in there out of nowhere. I mean, you mentioned it a little bit too, but I mean, do you think that is kind of the case where it is? I mean, they started with a really tough schedule, and that's definitely playing a role here.
Yeah, it's playing a role. I don't know how different the record would be if you swapped in, slightly lesser teams or just replaced one or two of those really, really hard games with more manageable matchups, but they also did lose to Temple and they really kind of fell apart in that game. I think that they're better now than they were then. I think that they're probably closer now to breaking through than they were then, which is good timing because the last 6 games are quite a bit more manageable than the first 6. But I think Bronco is also probably right in alluding to the idea that this is a more dangerous team than you would usually expect from a 1-5 group because they do have a fantastic passing game, and they do have a really, really lethal offense when it's on. The defense, I don't know if it's going to be taking that much of a step this week. I think it could get better, but we'll see. I've been fooled before by this defense, but they're not just decimated without anything going for them like you might expect from a 1-5 team. They just can't put it together for 60 minutes yet.
And if you kind of look, and I'll say too, I mean, that's more or less the same situation with New Mexico right now. But I mean, if you kind of look at the numbers, and yardage averages are always, you kind of got to tread lightly and all that. But moving the ball hasn't been a problem for Utah State. I think they're a top 20 team in total offense averages, 464 yards of total offense per game. But they're the worst red zone team off percentage alone in the Mountain West. I think just 70%. Colorado State's second lowest with 76. What's kind of fueling those red zone issues there?
So part of it is that they pick up entirely too many unsportsmanlike conduct penalties. They have done their best to address this. At times it has gotten better, and then they'll take a step backwards, and then they'll take a step forwards, and it just kind of oscillates between the two. And the guys who are getting called for those penalties changes every couple of weeks. It's a new guy who has those problems, and the old guy has it fixed. And that's been an issue. And I think that another one of the issues is that while Blake is gone, his offense is still here. Kyle Cefalo is a longtime Blake guy, and he's the current offensive coordinator and play caller. And that system, it puts up a lot of yards. It produces a lot of passing yards, especially, but it's very good at accommodating these gaudy numbers, except for when you get into the 20 and you have to run the ball, and the defense knows that you have to run the ball, and you have a condensed field that you can't throw these sweeping formations into and get the same open space that you usually have within this offense. And they've just never really figured out a solution for that. The red zone offense has been a problem for Utah State for several years. It's been a problem for the Anderson offensive system going well back beyond Utah State. It just doesn't really have answers for condensed fields. It's not built to accommodate that. If they don't score from 20 plus yards out, it gets very difficult for them to score.
Running back Rasul Faizan has kind of headed the run game to a certain degree. How have you seen him kind of progress this season?
He's been really good. He was solid for them last season as kind of part of a 1-2 punch with Davon Booth, who's now at Mississippi State. And stepping into the lead role, he's really not had any issues. He has taken on a much higher workload without any trouble. His averages are still good. The best thing about Rasul is that he never stops moving forward. He's very patient and willing to wait for the holes to develop, but he's still moving forward even as he's being patient. He keeps his legs churning. I've said before in different places, he's kind of a throwback running back. He runs like somebody that you might see more in the 70s or 80s than you would right now for the most part. But he's slippery. He's fast. He's just a solid back. He does really everything that you would want him to do, and he's been really, really strong in that lead role.
And then wide receiver Jalen Royals, I mean, he had a pretty sensational game in Albuquerque last year, that season finale as well, and he's been one of the best receivers in the Mountain West. It's kind of a similar point to the Faizan question, but I mean, how have you seen him kind of maybe take a little bit of a step forward, even with some quarterback issues and offensive issues sometimes?
Yeah, the biggest thing has been consistency for him. He was slow starting last year because it was his first year in a major role. This is a guy who was not highly recruited, and he needed a little bit of time to find his footing. But in the second half of the season, the highs were really, really high in 2023, and he's basically just captured those highs and removed the lows this year. He's so consistently good. He's always open. He's the fastest guy on the field. He is not the biggest receiver, but he plays much bigger than he is, especially going across the middle. He's pretty much complete as a wide receiver at this level. And he has the athleticism to match. It's very rare that you see a college receiver who just does not put a foot wrong, who does not make mistakes, but I can't remember the last time I saw Jalen Royals make a mistake.
Spencer Petras, quarterback, was really interested to talk to him at media days, just in terms of his decision to come back into football and or at least come back into playing after his I don't remember exactly how long he was at Iowa, but it felt like a long time. And to come back to get into it at Utah State and just kind of keep going there too. I mean, you mentioned some of the turnovers in that too, and that he's been able to kind of orchestrate the offense. But I mean, what have you seen out of him so far this year?
Yeah, it's been up and down. He has a good arm. He's not used it a ton. They haven't thrown the ball down the field as much as I think a lot of people were, and maybe Spencer included, were expecting. I wouldn't mind seeing more of that with the offensive line making improvements. I think they could probably afford to let him throw the ball down the field a little bit more, but he has had some bad luck on turnovers. There have been some passes that not just that it just he got unlucky with a guy popping up in the wrong place. That's happened too, but there have been 3 or 4 interceptions that were taken out of Utah State receivers' hands, either because they didn't catch it or because the ball was actually just taken away, like pulled away, wrestled away. That happened against Utah a couple weeks ago, where they would have had a touchdown and the defender just took the ball away. And so I can't really blame him for that. I think that he has been a little bit slow starting to games. He takes some time getting into the rhythm of the matchup, and he makes some mistakes early on that he probably shouldn't make. But I think he's been serviceable. I think that he's still learning the system, and he's obviously been around for a while, but there's stuff that he's not entirely comfortable with. He's maybe a little bit too quick to take check down sometimes, but I think he's been pretty good. And when he really gets going, the offense is very hard to stop. And you see that in the second half of the UNLV game. They went 50 plus yards and scored on basically every drive in the second half. They had one drive that was not going for 50-plus yards, and it was pretty much all throwing. And when you have a receiver like Jalen Royals, when you have guys stepping up like Jack Hestera, Brock Lane, obviously Russell Faison in the backfield, that's a lot of weapons for him to work with. And when he's feeling the game, when he's on time and really confident in his throws, he is very good at distributing the ball to all of those weapons, which is, I think, why he's here to begin with.
Defensively, there are some, some pretty quality players. Ike Larson, Jordan Vincent is another guy that we're familiar with from his New Mexico State days. You also mentioned there's some injuries, and when I look at the depth chart, I'm seeing some kind of oars on the defensive line, or at least the defensive end and all that. What can we expect from this defense come Saturday?
Yeah, so on the defensive line, I don't have the full list on the top of my head, but they are without both starting defensive ends, or at least they have been. Gabe Peterson is kind of day-to-day, another New Mexico State guy, but Blaine Spires is out. So they're without both of their starting defensive ends and the top guy off the bench, Marlon Dean. At defensive tackle, they have lost both of their top starters for the year, Taz Williams and Miguel Jackson, and so they're on to Gabe Iniguez, another New Mexico State guy who's playing like 60 snaps a game as a defensive tackle, which is not usually what you want. And so it's a lot of young guys. It's Kean Sloan, who has been here, kind of a pass rushing specialist, is playing at defensive end. I think he's getting better as the year goes on. Lawrence Falatea, Washington State transfer, has been surprisingly good for them. Also at defensive end, they've got a guy, William Holmes, who is like 26 years old and a true freshman playing organized football for the first time in his entire life. He was a baseball player before this. And that guy's taking like 20 snaps a game. That's where the defensive line is at. Defensive tackle, kind of the same story without, beyond Iniguez, Bo Miley is serviceable. They've got a young guy, Ricky Lolohea, playing his first real college reps these last couple weeks, and I think he's looked good. I would like to see more of him. Isaiah Bruce as well, Iowa transfer, has been decent for them up front. That's where the bulk of the injuries have come, or is at defensive line. At linebacker, they are a little bit weak still. Clyde Washington's currently day-to-day. He's been the starter for a couple weeks now, filling in for another injured player in Max Alford, who's been in and out of the lineup all season. John Ross May is really one of the only guys on the defense who has been consistently both on the field and good. And he's still around. I think he's a pretty good player for them at linebacker. Secondary has been fairly steady. Like you said, Jordan Vincent solid at safety. I think he's one of the guys on the defense who I don't really see making a lot of mistakes. One of the few guys who doesn't seem to make a lot of mistakes. Larson's highs are really, really high. He needs to run the plays as he's being told to run the plays, and that has been a conversation that they have been having with him all season, because he's maybe hunting for big plays a little bit more than he would need to be as a safety. Corners have been up and down. Avante Dickerson, DJ Graham, a lot of talent there, but they've just not been super consistent this season. And then they've got Torin Union as well, working on a snap count right now, but he's been very good for them as well at nickelback.
And then it's kind of a funny question to ask in terms of a 2-4 team playing a 1-5 team. But Utah State has dominated. The series against New Mexico, against New Mexico in terms of winning 7 straight. I don't even know how far that dates back. A loss to New Mexico doesn't eliminate Utah State from a bowl, but it makes it obviously very tricky and all that too. Does this feel like a big game for Utah State? Are people treating it like a big game?
Yeah, I think it probably doesn't help the stakes of this game that Utah State men's basketball has an exhibition game the day before, because that's going to take precedent in Logan. That's just the way that it is. But this is really, I think that the team recognizes this as a game they can't really afford to lose if they want to go to a bowl game. Technically would not eliminate them, as you said, but Washington State's on the schedule in the last 5 games, and I don't think these guys are going to beat Washington State. The other games left are winnable, at least more winnable than that. You've got teams like Hawaii, San Diego State, Wyoming, teams that are struggling, teams that are having rough years, that are kind of in similar places. But they have to start actually winning games at some point to do that, and they've not beaten an FBS team yet, and this is their first real opportunity that they have any hopes of winning in like a month, because they weren't going to beat Boise. They weren't going to beat UNLV. And so I do think it's a big game. I think it's a game that they know that they have to win if they want to have any hopes of going to a bowl game. And I think even beyond that, they just have to not lose by 20. They've not been within basically 20 points of anybody this season. Their closest loss of the year was the one that they just took, which was 16 points in a game that they trailed by 34 at halftime. They just need to look like a competitive football team. They need to not get run off of their own field by a 2-4 opponent. And I think that they know that.
With all that in mind and kind of, high stakes for Utah State and, certainly also some high stakes for New Mexico too, honestly. What is kind of your prediction for this game and why?
Yeah, I could see it going in either direction, because there's not going to be a whole lot of defense played here, which means that there's probably going to be a lot of points, and it's probably going to come down to the last couple possessions, because I don't think that either team is going to put up a lot of resistance, and I don't think that either offense really needs the help. Both of these offenses can move the ball. Both of these offenses have talented players. I love watching Devin Dampier play. I think it's going to be a fun quarterback matchup. I think there's probably going to be a lot of rushing yards. And so in a shootout, it's hard to get a great sense for it. I am going to lean toward New Mexico winning by a touchdown, because I haven't seen Utah State beat an FBS opponent yet, and New Mexico's looked pretty good these last two games, which is not the largest sample size, but it's better than what I'm working with over here. And so I will lean toward them for now, because I need to see it from Utah State. But I think that there's a real chance that Utah State could pull it off. It's just a matter of those defensive improvements that I think I saw in the second half of the UNLV game, and that they think they saw in the second half, those being real, those being actual improvements, those young guys being players who can give them good snaps and who can run the defense as designed. If they get that, I think that they probably win the game. I just don't know that they're going to get that. I would lean towards New Mexico winning.
Yeah, at this point in the week, usually I have a pretty good lean, if not my mind completely made up on, I think this is going to happen. This game in particular, I have no particular lean at this point, except for the fact, it's going to be a shootout more likely than not. With all that being said, that is Patrick Mayhorn with the Ag Ship. You can find his work there, doing great work covering Utah State. Patrick, thank you for coming on again, man. Thank you for coming on again, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, as we just mentioned, that was Patrick Mayhorn of the Ag Ship. Does a great job. Thought he gave great insight today on Utah State and kind of where they're at in a season that is not entirely dissimilar to New Mexico's to a certain degree. But before we go, like I do at the end and start of every show, I do want to keep plugging the live shows that Jeff and I have been doing. You can find them on YouTube and X, the live streams and all that. The next one will be 30 to 45 minutes after the Utah State game, so probably around, let's see, if that's a 2 p.m. kick, that's probably going to be about 6:30 or so, maybe 7 Mountain Time. So keep tuning in, and hope you guys enjoyed the episode.
Thank you for joining us. You can find this episode and all our podcasts on the Albuquerque Journal website, abqjournal.com, as well as on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. If you enjoy our podcasts, please like and subscribe, and consider becoming a digital subscriber to the Albuquerque Journal to help us continue to bring you more content like this. See the show notes for a discount on a digital subscription. Thank you for supporting the Albuquerque Journal, New Mexico's leading local news source.